All right. Well, hello, MaKenzie Fly. I'm so glad you are here. Thank you so much for joining me on Conversations for Yoga Teachers. How are you doing today?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I have been jazzed to hop on this call with you the entire day. It's an honor to be here with you, and I'm doing amazing. It's actually I just got off a call with some of my mastermind students and was sharing with them how today really is a perfect day, an ideal day. I've done all of my favorite things. So honestly, I have no complaints here. And after this, I have even more yumminess on my plate. I'm going to hang by the pool with my son. I'm going to see my friend in a show later. So it's been a really, really nice day.
That is great. And you're coming in from where in the world? Tell us where
Yeah.
you are.
Las Vegas. So
Okay.
in Nevada, in the desert, where it is slowly creeping to oven temperatures.
Yeah.
Although I don't mind the heat, I moved to the desert for a reason, but my husband cannot handle the heat. And he is a person who's always hot, and I'm a person who's always cold. So
Yeah.
it's that time of the year where we're like fighting over the thermostat. But
Yeah. Yeah.
anyway, it's
Yeah.
good. It's good. Where are you again? You're
I'm
east.
in Boston.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and we are getting into nice weather. So now is like the prime time to be here, not a month or 2 months ago. So, yeah, so that is cool to know. I always like to know where the guests are coming in from. So, I wanted to start with a particular just open-ended question, but something you just said sort of made me think of something, and I too was really looking forward to this conversation. And as I was walking the dog this morning, I thought of you and I thought of me, and we're both experienced teachers. And I thought of sort of conceptually for both of us, but obviously I want to hear your point of view. When you were thinking about being a yoga teacher and you think about, like you just described, a day, like today, and what you're doing in this day, did you envision back then a day like you're having today? Is that in sync with the vision you had for yourself as a teacher? Because I can think of when I was brand new, I looked up to someone and we were at a teacher training and she was leading the training and I saw her like writing in her date book. This was back in the day when everybody had date books. And I remember watching her write in her date book and thinking, oh, I aspire to have days like this person. So I'm sort of curious, like now I look back on that from my own lens. And for you, when you look back at where you were and where you are, how do those days compare or your vision compare?
Mm. Thank you so much for that question. I think it's a beautiful opportunity for not just me, but also the listeners to kind of reflect. And look, listen, I've been teaching for almost 14 years and have basically done every iteration and variation of the job. And all have been beautiful in different seasons of my life,
Yeah.
and all very valuable and have come with their pros and cons and the lessons. And while there were times where it really worked, there was also times where I recognized that it was no longer either in alignment with my values or sustainable with a certain season that I was stepping into. So all has been great. I do sort of miss sometimes the studio hustle in the sense of the amount of people that I got to see, the social butterfly side of it. However, my days currently are very, very spacious, but it's because I've made many moves to set it up to be that way. As I am recently a mom, I became a mom a year and a half ago. My first son is a toddler, and I've also got another one in the oven cooking. I'm about 6 months pregnant and expecting in September. So have littles, and I just can't, I don't really have the time or the desire to be doing a lot. And I really needed to think of how can I still teach yoga on a bigger scale. And when I say bigger scale, I just mean in the way of seemingly doing less while making more. So how can I think of what's the 10x sort of vision and version of yoga teaching to where I'm no longer trading time for dollars, and where I feel like I can offer one container, but it's a lot more scalable. And so all that to say is it took me a really long time to arrive to where I am. And maybe that beginner teacher wouldn't have looked at the day that I had today and thought that that was it, thought that that was the dream. But the me 5 years ago definitely would have been envious of the day that I had today. And I'm
Mm.
also so grateful for the day that I have today to teach one class, to lead my mastermind experience, to be on this show as like a guest expert and speaker on an incredible podcast with an incredible host whom I'm admired and who offered so much to my audience. And that is basically it. And I'm making as much as I made when I was teaching like 18 classes a week plus, and really feeling like I had to work really hard for that. And so yes, I'm very, very proud of that. But I don't know. Like I don't think I would have valued it as much if I would have looked at it 14 years ago. I probably would have thought that it was very boring. But now I'm really glad that I took the time and got the education and also bet on myself and was a little courageous and brave to believe in myself and my ability and my independence before there was actual proof. And you actually posted something recently that I was like, yes, Karen, double tap it. It was about basically adopting the identity of an entrepreneur, and that you are like, I'm an entrepreneur, and every opportunity that I have is something that I've created. And I would just urge all yoga teachers to think of that faster, because usually we only see one picture or one trajectory of what a yoga teacher looks like. And that can be limiting. It might be perfect for some people, but it's not the only option out there. And so I'm really grateful for my journey, and today has been great. And I like to help other people try to figure out how they can make that in their life based on their version of success and their values and really what they want in life too. But yeah, I guess a very long-winded answer to say, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just sometimes it's a question we don't even ask ourselves because we're sort of not caught up in a bad way, but just caught up in the doing and the being and the reframing and the changing. So sometimes when people come on, or I don't even know if I've asked this question before, but I was inspired to ask you because I sense that your day today probably looked pretty different from your day 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 14 years ago. And it's just an interesting thing for the listener, give them a sense of sort of the trajectory and how it can look different. So having said that, I'd love to hear a little bit about how you got started and what even inspired you in the first place to teach yoga. What was sort of the catalyst there?
Yeah. I found yoga very early on, and I'm so grateful that yoga found me early. I found it around 15 years old, and I wasn't really looking, I didn't know that it would be as important as it ended up being, basically, but I was visiting some family as I was preparing for college auditions. My background is actually in musical theater and dance. So I was visiting my family who lived next to this really prestigious ballet studio. And I went there during the summer to do an intensive and really grow in my skill and basically prep my audition material for college. And while I was doing that intensive, there was this Bikram yoga studio next door. And so that was my first exposure, was a Bikram yoga class. And I don't know how I had enough energy to do this, but I was basically doing the ballet intensive all day. So from 8 to 5 was dancing and doing conditioning and training of all styles of ballet, tap, modern, jazz, all of it. And then would go and take a full Bikram class, which is absolutely stupid, just stupid. I don't encourage or recommend this. But I've always been a person that's had like a lot of energy, a lot of passion, very fiery, very self-motivated. And so I was really hooked from the very beginning then. And I think I didn't realize, and this maybe is similar to other people's story, is I didn't realize what was actually happening, the deep sort of healing, or I guess just the deep healing that was happening underneath. But I came to the practice having experienced trauma in my family. So without really unpacking it or, taking it too dark too soon, I know you and your listeners just met me, but my family went through this horrible situation where it came to light that my father was actually filming video content in my room and was making content, like pornographic content, out of my friends and my family. And my solution to that as a very young teen was to block everything out and shut down and pretend that a lot of things weren't happening. And I remember now looking back, I'm like remembering going to yoga for the first time. And really what was happening was learning how to be aware and how to feel. And so initially, the yoga practice made everything way worse because I started feeling for the first time. And I see this as a teacher in students too. You know, it's like finally you slow down and you start to feel and things come up to the surface and you're like, why am I crying in this pigeon pose or whatever? So it got a whole lot worse for me before it got better as a practitioner. However, I knew that there was something to it and medicine to it. So I pretty much consistently practiced for the first 5 years from 15 to 20 and was really working through it myself. And then became a yoga teacher by 20 years old. I went to New York City in the summer between my sophomore and junior college or year in college, and then started teaching immediately in college, which is indicative that this was a big deal to me. You know, I'd be at parties and people are like, let's, Edward Scissorhands and chug both of these beers. I'm like, sorry guys, can't. I'm going to go teach yoga in the morning at 6 a.m. What college student does that?
Mm-hmm.
And so was very early on rearranging my entire life to accommodate sharing or keeping the practice for myself, but also sharing it with other people because of the profound transformation that it had on me and my own version of skeletons in the closet, and coming out of thinking that I was too broken, too ugly, too far gone to be healed. And I've always felt, even with performance being my main job for a long time, and that's really what brought me and my now husband to Las Vegas, was performance. While I enjoyed performance and felt like it was my career, I always felt like teaching yoga was more of like my dharma and like my purpose because of how much it truly saved me and helped me kind of come back online. And all those cliches of making a message out of my mess, making a portal out of my pain, and transmuting all of that trauma that could have been something that I identified with forever, and instead used as a way to invite other people to see that they too, like, nothing's too ugly. You're never, you never are too confusing, too messy, too ugly to practice yoga. And as long as you have this willingness to sit with yourself and to start to feel, profound healing can occur. And so that's I couldn't help myself, and I think a lot of teachers can resonate with that. When you experience such a deep transformation yourself, it's like you couldn't get me to stop talking about yoga if we tried. I'm that person who turns every conversation into yoga. And so that's been my journey, is that as much as I even wanted to do other things, I don't think I really could have. And it's been pretty strong since 15 years old practicing, and then 20 years old teaching. I'm now about to celebrate my 34th birthday in December. So like I said, coming up on 14 years of teaching, and have done, like I said, the studio teaching. I've led yoga teacher trainings. I host international retreats, built online courses and programs. So really just gotten creative as to all the ways that I can do it.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's been a lot, but
Yeah.
really worth it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that deeply personal story. And I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine, as you were sharing that, I can't even imagine what you went through. So I'm just so sorry that you had to experience that.
Mm.
One of the things that I was thinking as you were talking, you know, and obviously this is where we start the framework for the conversation, is the impact of those experiences on you as a person. And then when you began to teach, I'm wondering, especially when you were saying your feelings of, I don't think you used the word feeling broken, but there were some other adjectives that you used that sounded to me like those were things that you felt as a byproduct or a direct result of what you experienced. And I'm wondering, because I hear a lot of times from yoga teachers, when they are teaching, the mere walking in the room and teaching the class can trigger them to have memories that they aren't necessarily conscious of, but the symptom they experience might be anxiety or nervousness, or I don't feel like I'm worth it, or I don't feel like I deserve to be here. And
Mm.
so I'm wondering, for you, when you started teaching, having this experience in your past, did any of that come through? And if so, how did you manage that?
Hmm. I think my initial intuition or gut is not really, but it's because of my performance background. So I haven't really struggled with finding my voice or feeling nervous or being worried about standing in front of a crowd. I'm very much a drama queen. I love the attention. I'm like, where's the spotlight? Moving into the spotlight, finding my light. So it has never really been a struggle in that sense. However, when I speak to other yoga teachers, I do know that is very real. And look, I mean, I don't share this story for sympathy. I don't want people to feel bad for me. I say it so that whatever version of your trauma, whatever version of skeletons are in your closet, that you feel safe enough to bring them forward, not only in your life, but in your yoga teaching, and actually use it as the backbone, as the spine that gives you the authority to be a teacher.
Hmm.
Because you
Hmm.
can't really be a teacher unless you yourself have been through some dark night of the soul, have experienced some lower emotion, and transmuted that, transformed that through the practice and science of yoga.
Hmm.
And that is exactly the thing that makes you valid, that makes you authentic, that makes you right to teach, which is usually when people are dealing with insecurity or imposter syndrome, it's that they're not believing that they have a right to do something. So if anything, those things that felt like inconveniences or obstacles or are the most embarrassing thing about you are actually the thing that make you the most relatable, that make you resonate and relate with other people.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's such an important concept. And when I was listening to you, I was thinking of just the idea of wanting to teach authentically and how so many teachers want that for themselves. And it sounds like you've really found your lane, your way of teaching so that it feels like it's natural and your natural way of just radiating out into the world. So that I can definitely tell that from just talking to you. One of the things that, a lot of times when I have people come on the show that are yoga teachers, we get into some of the skill part of teaching yoga. Like now we're sort of talking about some of the sort of mindset components and ways of being components. And one of the things that comes up a lot are questions around sequencing. Matter of fact, I just did an Instagram live today with someone and we talked about sequencing at length. And so I would love to hear a little bit from you about how you're approaching sequencing your classes and if there's something that you're doing that you're training teachers on that you find is really working well for them.
Yes, 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 yes. Thank you so much for this question. It is currently lighting me up and is the thing that I'm becoming known for and also want to be known for. So, really, the big idea, and maybe this is something that's rubbing up against your listeners, even, is the way I approach it is that in yoga teacher trainings, and usually when yoga teachers sit down to class plan, is that the first thing that they're doing is actually thinking about the sequencing and that this can be great. However, it's a missed opportunity in some ways to focus on the sequencing or at the end of the day, just the physicality of just what the body is doing. And so the idea that I'd love to present to yoga teachers and really just ask them to explore or be open to toying with is what if instead of sequencing first, the thing that we were building the entire class around was a theme. And when I say theme, I don't mean like how you'd theme a birthday party or it's very specific as to what is appropriate theme material in the context of yoga. But the main idea is that it's some meaningful message, it's some life lesson or some skill that all people could benefit from. And that when you organize your entire class around that meaningful message, that it creates this profound sense of cohesion. So the meaningful message then informs the poses that you choose, which then informs the words that you say, the cues that you decide to share, which then informs the music that you pick if you are of the style and of the taste of using music. And so the elements of your class and your class planning process is no longer these separate, unintegrated things, but we're yoga-ing the yoga-ing. We're bringing union to all of these class pieces. And it's a different skill that I don't feel like a lot of teachers are really given in yoga teacher trainings. But it's kind of in many ways, or at least the teachers that I talked to, it was the thing that they were hoping to get in yoga teacher training that they didn't feel like was that addressed. And I understand why. I mean, having led 14 200-hour yoga teacher trainings myself, a couple of 300 hours, there's just simply not enough time, because the beginnings of things is like just being able to, as you so beautifully do and are on a mission to do, is like directing the body and getting really great at those action cues, getting phenomenal at your anatomical cues of bringing variation and color to describing what the body is doing. But at some point in your yoga teaching career, you might notice that you feel either bored or stale. And in my experience, and when I talk with other teachers, that what they're telling me is like, I'm just not that interested in the postures anymore, in the body. I feel like I'm an asana instructor, like telling you what to do, but I'm not actually teaching you yoga, which is where this idea of theme weaving comes in, which is what I'm presenting to all of your people, is like, what if we incorporated these meaningful messages, these inspiring ideas, and that we use that as the heartbeat, as the through line of the class that informed everything else.
Mm-hmm.
And to the student perspective, how it feels is just way heightened. It seems so much more thoughtful, and it seems so much more full of heart and full of soul and full of story, and no longer just this workout, but this work in. And so anyway, that's the beginnings of it. Does it sound like with what I've said, I mean, does it feel like your audience
Yeah.
can benefit from some of this? And yeah, what do you
Yeah,
think about it?
certainly. I mean, when I hear you describe it, I sort of feel like if creating a sequence was a series of steps, you've sort of taken something that maybe somebody has further down the line in the steps and you've elevated it to the first thing. So you're
Yeah.
saying, let's first decide what's the theme that I want to communicate? What's sort of the storyline here? And it's almost like if I was going to write a play, I would know what that is, and then I would write the play and the actors' lines and how they interact with one another. It would all be around communicating this message, whatever this theme is. So I totally I get what you're saying. I understand it. It's a really interesting way to think about sequencing. So I'd love to sort of take it from the description to something sort of actionable. So maybe not actionable in terms of doing it, but the step before, which is like an example. Let's think about like what are some of the themes that you're leveraging this framework to communicate?
Yeah, great question. So to even kind of back it up a little further for clarity's sake, sometimes I think it's easier to like to talk about what something is not to truly understand what something is. For example, a lot of times when yoga teachers attempt theme weaving, I think a massive, attempt at it that I see all over the place is intention setting. And when I say theme weaving, I'm not meaning intention setting. And although intention setting is beautiful, it almost, to me, and this is subjective, this is my opinion. So that means that you can have a different opinion, especially if you really love intention setting as a teacher and you feel like it's effective, that it helps your students. By all means, keep going with your bad self. Again, this is just opening your mind to other ways and asking you to experiment with other ideas and other methodologies and techniques. But intention setting almost seems like going to school and a teacher standing at the front of the class and basically saying, you choose your own lesson today. And so I feel like it takes away your whole job as the teacher to actually arrive prepared with a message. So that's the first problem that I see with intention setting, is that yes, while it's very unique and personal, that then what you end up with is this room full of people that all have different intentions. And so there can't possibly be a collective stroke of insight together, which is what makes something feel really powerful and spiritual, is when the whole room is like light bulbs are clicking on a unified concept. Another problem with intention setting is that it brings you more into your analytical mind as opposed to your feeling body. So when yoga teachers are cueing people to think about their intentions, they're prompting them to think about all these things that maybe they want to change about themselves. So there's this like bypassing of revelations and skipping right to the revolution part.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Of like, here's all the things I want to change. And it just makes people think like, oh, what do I really need more of? And it's like, we're trying to come to our mat to not think as much, to experience conscious and pure breath and sensation. So it's the absence of that thinking and journaling and prompting and prodding and poking the mind. So when I say intentions, or when I say theme weaving, it's not intention setting. Now, the next thing that I think it's not, and this may be semantics here, but a lot of yoga teachers use the terminology of Dharma talks. And I affectionately say, and again, affectionate is the key word there. So if this offends you or ruffles your feathers, like, please know that I'm saying it from a place of love, because I used to do this myself. But the tendency and the temptation and perhaps the pitfall of Dharma talks is they end up being Dharma dumps. Like this big lecture, either at the beginning of class or at the end of class, that feels completely separate and unintegrated. Again, this idea of like having separate things where the teacher is standing at the front of the class and talking about this concept that's albeit powerful and beautiful, but it's long-winded and it's not woven or threaded throughout the experience. So if those two things are not theme weaving of Dharma talks or Dharma dumps and intention setting, so then it begs the question, like, what is theme weaving? So the definition that I just use is theme weavers are yoga teachers who leverage skillful storytelling to thread meaningful messages, life lessons, and inspiring ideas throughout the yoga experience. And throughout is really the key word.
Mm.
So if that's what it's not, as well as what it is, I think it's also important to talk about, like, why does this matter? Why should you as a yoga teacher even entertain the idea of learning this skill? How does it affect you as a yoga teacher? How does it elevate your yoga teaching? Well, it basically elevates the experience. I love that you use that word, as you said, it elevates it. So that's the main thing, is that it's making it much more than a physical experience, but an emotional and energetic, a spiritual experience. It also makes you and gives you the potential to be a lot more educational in terms of these meaningful messages and these life lessons that come from different places, like yoga philosophy, from just skills, from positive emotions. These are all things that really work well as theme material, because they're pretty universal, right? Everybody could benefit from learning something about yoga philosophy or some sort of skill like active listening or empathetic listening, some sort of positive emotion like joy, or compassion or something like that. This is all kind of great theme material that everyone could benefit from. So it gives you this other material to talk about other than describing the posture. And so it just makes it much more vast on the topics that you could speak to, as far as educating them and teaching them how to actually be a better person. What actually happens when they roll up their mat and walk out of the room. I think it also really makes you a lot more captivating as a teacher, because storytelling is one of the oldest tricks in the book, of helping us not only learn information, but retain information. It keeps us interested. And so you become this, it's so much more captivating to be in the room with a teacher who is very thoughtfully sprinkling and peppering through these little bite-sized messages during the whole class. And it leaves a lasting impression. I mean, these things stay and stick with your students long after Savasana.
Hmm.
So when you're more memorable because of these stories that you're telling them, you're more likely to not only attract students, but retain students and therefore grow your class sizes, grow your following. And not to say that it makes you more popular, but that is a measure of you being effective, like an effective teacher, because people come back to the teachers that like really helped them understand it. So when I say popular, it's not about like a vanity metrics or a popularity contest, but it's about your efficacy and actually teaching them something that's helpful, because students come back to the teachers that help them truly.
Hmm.
So, with all that being said, if that's the what it is, what it's not, why it matters, I think the things that kind of make it really difficult for teachers is that number one, you're not really taught how to do this in yoga teacher training. So, you're not really given any education on it. And then the not necessarily knowing what makes a good theme to build from is also kind of ambiguous sometimes if you don't have great models that you're currently taking class from. And then consistently knowing where to look to find materials is another problem that yoga teachers have, of how do I stay inspired? You know what I mean? How do I maintain this sense of Tony Robbins level motivational energy? And then how do I plan the themes in a way that doesn't take all day? Because I can't remember who said this quote, but it's so good. It's something to the effect of inspiration requires perspiration, meaning that this level of intention and thoughtfulness and theme weaving takes a lot of time beforehand. Like you can't just show up and wing it in a lot of ways. You've got to premeditate and pre-plan so that it's really like thoughtful. And eventually you kind of get to that place, but how to plan it in a way that's streamlined, in a way that's short as possible is a big problem that teachers have. So they don't do it because it just takes too long. It feels too much like a production. And then also not knowing how to actually deliver it in the yoga room without it feeling really preachy, without it feeling really random, and doing it in a way that feels concise and succinct, almost like a yoga sutra, where it's like, bam, I understand what the point is, and that somebody at the end of class could also repeat it back.
Hmm.
So, does all of that somewhat answer like what's an example of it? Or do you want to kind of like try to build one in the moment?
Well, one of the things that's coming up for me, and thanks for sharing that, because I think it gives people more of an idea of what does this really look like. And I think the next step is, people are going to want to hear, well, what are some actual real life examples? And
Yeah.
I'll just kind of share as you were talking, one of the things that came up for me, I know you and I think we may have talked on your podcast about my concept of a signature sequence. And
Hmm.
oftentimes, when I talk about that as a way to free a yoga teacher up from the belief that they have to change their sequence every week, and therefore they can get better at a sequence simply by repeating it for some period of time, I don't know how many times, but until they feel like they're teaching in a way that they really feel confident. One of the things that I'll talk about is you could use the same sequence from an architectural standpoint and overlay a different theme on top. So
Mm.
some of the themes that I just generally throw out are things like stability, focus, even just, the concepts, any concept from yoga philosophy, even if we start with like the first sutra, like yoga's purpose is to calm the fluctuations in the mind. Like if I went in and I had the same sequence, however, I went in with this idea that my theme for this quote unquote same sequence is the purpose of yoga is to calm the fluctuations of the mind. Now I'm going in there with something that informs what I say, how I say it, if I leave them in silence, what I might say at the beginning as a little blah, 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 what I might say at the end as a little tie-in and shavasana. So is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you brought up another just really great point in general. And I kind of name this concept, maybe you call, I don't even know if this is what it is, but this is what it makes me think of, is like the 80-20 rule of keep 80% the same and then change up 20% when it comes to being a teacher of longevity and sustaining your energy and sanity, of just not starting, like scrapping everything and starting from zero and reinventing the wheel every time. So 100%, like if you have one sequence and then you just teach a different theme, and then the next week keep the theme and the sequence, but maybe a different playlist, like it's still a very different experience. And coming from a background of teaching Ashtanga yoga, I am so grateful for that, because I know without a shadow of a doubt that people benefit from doing the same sequence over and over and over. And I've had students for 15 years now, almost now, who are still doing that sequence with me and they still love it. And so I have no qualms with repeating things or just changing one or two poses in it, or like you said, adopting a different theme. I think that that's like a great way to keep yourself in the game for the long run. To tack on maybe like other examples of themes, I'm trying to remember. This morning already feels like so long ago. But I'm like, okay, what was my theme this morning? So I chose, and this is maybe just another little easy, quick, actionable tip for your listeners, is your theme, you need to be able to boil it down to one word. And a big mistake that I see a lot of yoga teachers doing is they'll find this, albeit inspirational quote on Instagram, but they think that the quote is their theme. And really, that is not the theme. That is a supporting, what I call in my methodology, a breadcrumb. It's a supporting statement that bolsters and enhances the message. But think about what that actual quote, if that's what you found and were initially lit up on the inside about, of like, oh, this is inspiring me. What is that theme actually about? And boil it down to one word. Because the more clear you are of like one word, the easier it's going to transmit and be understood, because of that clarity and that simplicity that you found. So this morning I was teaching on tapas, which all yoga teachers probably know. That's the concept of like burning enthusiasm. And I always love, I think it was Sharat Joyce maybe, who said that it's the 4 Ds, that there's devotion, there's discipline, there's determination, and one more D, discernment maybe. And so I started not by just, saying tapas and teaching on this whole thing, but I shared this little story and was saying there's a concept in Japan, maybe you've heard of this, it's called kintsugi. And it's the art of taking broken pieces of pottery and using molten gold to mold it back together. And the end result ends up being this beautifully whole piece of pottery that's more beautiful because of its cracks and repairs, not in spite of it. And so I just dropped that little thing, told that little story, kept teaching. A little bit later, I relate it to kind of what they're doing and make a metaphor out of it and say, your breath is kind of, if we're using this analogy, your breath is kind of the molten gold. If we're kintsugi potteryists, it's the thing that's bringing all these little broken pieces back together and helping you go from separated and unintegrated to connected and whole again. And I don't say anything else. I keep cueing the class, say, talk to the body, talk to the sequences. And then maybe a little bit later, I'm trying to remember exactly what I said. I'll kind of help them understand that how it connects to tapas and say it takes devotion and discipline and determination to not buy into the belief that you're too broken, that you're too far gone, that you're too unfixable. It takes devotion to believe in yourself and to daily put yourself back together. Yogis would call this tapas. This is actually a concept in yoga philosophy called tapas. And so I'm teaching an idea, but it already has been, they're better able to grasp it because of everything else that I've already said. Then I might say one or two more things to try to make it more actionable throughout the rest of the class by charging students to see how this is applying in their life or how they can maintain this idea throughout the rest of their practice, throughout the rest of their day. So a closing statement might be kind of like a kintsugi artist with their pottery and with their molten gold. Your yoga practice is a thing that you do that helps you bring yourself back together. And yes, that takes discipline and determination and devotion to yourself and heat. It takes fire to not give up on yourself and to show up every day to make meaning out of your mess or something like that, to kind of close it up. So that might help listeners understand of how it's these really powerful statements that all relate to one another, but are not given all at once. Mm-hmm. From my performance background, we used to have this, I remember this so distinctly. It was a guest teacher. He came in and he said something about like, don't spill your purse. And basically it's the art of dripping stuff out and not just like revealing your bag of tricks right out of the gate. Because a lot of times, and this just with your work too, your students are hearing like 15% of what you're saying anyway. So if you say it all at once, it's like drinking out of a water hose, or what are those called on the side of the road? Fire hydrant.
Fire hydrant. Yeah.
It's like drinking out of a fire hydrant as opposed to sipping from a water fountain. So it's like little sips are a little more effective. And in my work and the work that I do and the methodology and the template that I equip and empower teachers with, I help them understand like exactly what works as these breadcrumbs so that you're very thoughtfully dropping them throughout class and giving you the framework to plan it really quickly in a way that feels very concise, very powerful, as well as like training you on those little tips of like how to do it in the moment so that it feels authentic. So it's honestly my favorite thing. I love doing it. I love like teaching in this way, but more so I love helping other yoga teachers teach in this way, because the feedback that I hear is that it just feels so much more inspired. People feel excited to go teach again, and people start hearing things from their students. Like they get messages that are just like, what you said today meant so much to me. Or they come up after class with tears in their eyes and they're like, you have no idea how much I needed to hear that. And to me, not that it's about that affirmation or accolade, but it's just a sign that the yoga is meaningful, and that it's working, it's good feedback to hear every now and again.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when I hear you describe it, sometimes I talk about the difference between classes being transactional versus transformational. And I think of it as a vehicle, the vehicle being this theme weaving to shifting your classes from being more transactional, where people come, they check the box in their mind, I did yoga today, versus what you're describing, which is I might come because yoga's on my list. However, what I just experienced really shifted my inner way of being, maybe the way I look at myself, maybe the way I look at a particular problem I have, maybe the way I look at the world. And I could see that could motivate people to come up to you and the teachers you work with and share those thoughts, because that is a different level of experience that you're at cause affecting in your students.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for saying that. And I really appreciate you noticing that. And I'm kind of just of the belief that to some degree, asanas and postures are discriminatory by nature at some point to certain people. So like, for example, a handstand might just not be in the cards or structurally available to certain bodies. And so when you're only talking about the body, there's somebody in the room who might not be able to do it because of the bones that they have. And so when you open it up to these deeper messages, it makes the practice so much more universal and so much more accessible. Because I could be teaching bed yoga to somebody and they're barely doing any movement, and yet they're having this deeply profound, I don't know why I'm getting emotional, but just like a deeply profound sense of self-acceptance, feeling enough, like they are doing the practice too. when maybe they literally don't have arms, when they literally don't have legs. So
Hmm.
I just feel like it brings it back to the heart of what we're doing, which is available or should be available to all people.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean the other thing that I was thinking as you were sharing is, you know, I based on how you describe it, I sort of think in two parallel paths. I think of if I'm the kind of yoga teacher who's inspired to teach with this model, number one, I probably really need to know my sequence well, because if I don't know my sequence well, to overlay these additional components on top of it would be challenging. So that's one thing that comes to my mind. The
Yeah.
second thing, though, is, and this is where I think this is such a huge growth opportunity for people. If I'm feeling safe staying in the zone of speaking to action, and I'm hearing what you're describing and I'm interested by it, but there's a voice in my head that says, who are you to think you could speak to themes that are about life, about living, about life experiences? I don't know that I am confident enough
Yeah.
to sort of step outside the lines and share in a way that you're describing. So how do you speak to that when you work with teachers?
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I'm so glad you brought it up because this might not be for everybody, and listen to that. If you've tried it on, if you feel like you really took the time to learn the methodology and really practiced it, and it always feels inauthentic or forced, or that you're full body blushing or awkward turtling out the door. I've had people who are like, I enjoy receiving it, but I really don't feel confident or capable to do it. And the thing is that even without a yoga class at the end of the day is kind of already themed in the sense of usually like when you were like, what's your go-to theme? I would always just say like breath is a theme and concentration is a theme, an underscoring theme of all practices. So to me, those are all kind of already included there. And that if you were beginning, if you wanted to like take a crack at it, even without any teaching, how can you like make breath and concentration awareness a through line through your practice? And I think that that could be hugely transformational and helpful for your people. But to your point, and just to the initial question, is sometimes people, they don't really jive with it, and that's okay too. And I also don't want you to think that your teaching isn't enough if you don't incorporate this, and that you
Yeah.
can have very powerful classes that are heavily speaking to the body and are heavily talking about action, and that it is also something that you might want to layer. Like you said, you don't really want to like start out of the gate trying to be spiritual, because then if you don't also have just like the keeping rhythm and able to sequence together thoughtful postures, then it's not enough scaffolding or foundation, and the whole thing just kind of crumbles apart and feels way more awkward. So
Yeah.
there is a time and a place in your teaching career and experience in which this may or may not be appropriate depending upon you.
Yeah, I think about, I talk a lot of times about the opportunity to teach off the mat. So do more of the walk and talk versus the practice with me approach. And I'm thinking about that now as you're talking, because one of the things I get is, well, how am I supposed to sort of break up with my yoga mat when I go in and teach? Because I'm so used to teaching that way. So I'll sort of frame a little experiment for them to do. Go in the room, start on your feet, put them in an initial pose where they're not looking right at you, and see how long you can stay on your feet. And at the end of the class, when you're driving home, if you did go back to practice, ask yourself, what caused me to go back to practice? Was it that person that was looking up at you, pleading with their eyes, please practice with us? And you interpreted that look as, oh my God, they don't know what they're doing. I need to hop back on the mat. Was it that you forgot what came next in the sequence? So you were the impetus to go, whatever it was, identify it. But the idea is you're experimenting with it. You're not putting pressure on yourself to automatically flip the switch and be the kind of teacher who 100% walks around. And so I sort of think for people listening, would you say, or maybe you teach folks, that there's sort of, when you use the word slow drip, I think of that too. Is there sort of a transition to, obviously, you're at a point where you can do this almost unconsciously. You can just go in the room and in your head probably say, today I'm going to focus on X, and all of a sudden you're just weaving it through. But for
Mhm.
somebody who's just beginning, they're not there. So,
Mhm.
what from a technical side could they experiment with
Yeah.
to get the ball rolling to sort of see, like, am I trying this on? How am I feeling?
Yeah, great question. I think most teachers try to apply this at the end of class, and it ends up being a lot of talking while the students are in Savasana. And I would actually encourage, if you're going to take a crack at it without really having much training or knowing about it, but you just want to try to put yourself in the fire of your own discovery and experimentation, then I would actually challenge you to do it more at the beginning of class, to introduce the idea early so that it seems intentional and not as some sort of afterthought of, oh shoot, I should probably say something inspirational. And then you just end up like rambling over your students while they're meant to be resting and integrating. It is way too late to drop a thematic cue at the end of class. And something that I'm a big like believer in is non-negotiable is like at least 5 minutes of pure silence for Shavasana. Like do not speak at all during that time. And any breadcrumb is actually after, is bringing your students kind of out of the Shavasana shape. So I guess the short answer would be try to introduce the idea early. So more in the beginning, and as if it's the foreshadow or the preface or announcing the topic, because that's going to feel a lot more, like I said, again, just like intentional and thoughtful instead of like buttoning it on at the end. It feels
Mm-hmm.
rushed and not on purpose.
Mm. Yeah, and one sort of final question on this. I'm thinking also for a teacher listening who's really like jazzed up about the idea of doing this, but just is thinking like, how am I going to get the nerve to start talking? Like I think about that person who's just feeling like I would love to do this, but I'm just so nervous to start to use my voice in this way. What would you say to that person to get the ball moving forward?
Yeah. I'd say I love you. I love you, dear little teacher who is feeling that fear and maybe doing it anyway. And that emotion or that sign is not the reason to stop, and is the exact reason, that maybe it's the time to kind of try these things. And that honestly, energetically, like nervousness and excitement are kind of the same thing. It's just in different situations. So maybe try to view or reframe that emotion of, instead of being like nervous, try to view it as being excited at this opportunity of doing something different. Energetically is kind of what I would say to that. But then also just like logistically, keep it simple. Let it then just be one sentence that's like 7 words long. So that maybe this challenge is not as challenging because it's just a shorter, simple sentence that's very concise. And then also another really actionable tip is do it during a time where students are still, so that you don't also have to manage the rhythmicity, because it's a whole other layer to keep the rhythm of class and cue the asanas and the body and the drishti and all the things while also saying these thematic cues. So don't try to do anatomical and thematic cues at the same time. Let it be in a pocket of stillness so that you can say your thematic cue, let it land in the clear, feel your feelings, be nervous, blush, and then move on.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think a lot of times, teachers need to hear both the technical piece and also sort of the emotional mindset piece to be able to move forward. And you weave those two together beautifully. So gosh, I mean, there's so many things I wanted to ask that we didn't get to because we really took a deep dive into this, but I think this was so valuable. I don't really talk about this in this particular way. And so I think this was just such a valuable conversation to have. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'd love for people to hear how they can get in touch with you. I know you work with teachers and you obviously talked a little bit about your program. So feel free to share how people can connect with you and how they can find out more about the programs that you offer.
Yes, yes. Well, thank you just for the opportunity. I am smiling ear to ear. This is my favorite thing to talk about, and I'm just grateful for any opportunity to share it with anybody and everybody who will give me the time of day to listen. So, my name is MaKenzie Fly, and you could probably search that on places. But my handle, most places, is Master Your Yoga Teaching. And that's because it's the same name as my podcast, which Karen was recently on. And it's already the most, like, one of the most talked about episodes, buzzed about episodes. I've had people in my community reach out and ask for specific links and stuff. So go check out her episode on the podcast. She came and shared all of her genius around anatomy and her blueprint and methodology and all the things. So, Master Your Yoga Teaching is another great free resource for you that's for yoga teachers, similar to this podcast in terms of just building businesses, understanding teaching techniques. I do a lot of guest expert interviews as well as a ton of solo episodes. And so that would be a place to start and really just kind of plug into my community is the podcast. But I also wanted to offer your community a free sample of my class planning subscription that's called Inspired Flow Monthly. And so basically this subscription does all of the work for you of theme weaving. So if you've listened and you're like, this sounds amazing, but who has time to find these stories, to think of the sequences, to make the playlist that match the meaningful message with the super specific lyrics and all the things, that's what Inspired Flow Monthly is. So I take off all the pressure and the class planning work for you and just equip you with all of the thematic messages. So I literally write out a script in case you want to say it verbatim and you're really nervous. Or you could just be inspired by the vague idea and have a little general direction and then go rogue from there. So a free little sample for your community to just get in and then take a try at theme weaving with the one that I've mapped out for you might be helpful for people to at least get started.
Awesome. Well, that sounds great. And I will include the link to your Instagram, to your podcast, and to this membership that you're talking about in the show notes. So for people listening, you can just go there. So thank you so much for being here. I had a lot of fun and I learned a lot. And this will go live. We're recording today on the 28th of May, and this is actually going to go live on June 2nd, 2025. So in just a handful of days. So I'm excited to have that drop live so people can hear it. So
Yeah,
thank you so much. And I look forward to getting this out there in the world next week.
you're welcome. And thank you so much too. Bye,
Of
everybody.
course. Bye-bye.